These are 12 Hollywood actresses whose private lives told a story very different from the one the cameras captured. Women who carried a hidden struggle with intimate addiction beneath the surface of fame, beauty, and applause. Hollywood has always been good at selling an image. Red carpets, glossy magazine covers, carefully controlled press statements. But behind all of that, some of the most famous women in the world were fighting something deeply personal. Something they could not simply act their way out of. A pattern of compulsive behavior tied to physical intimacy. A need so strong it shaped their choices, their relationships, and in some cases, their entire careers. The women on this list are not here to be shamed. Their stories are here because they are honest, and honesty, even when it is uncomfortable, matters. Starting at number 12. Sharon Stone built her career on boldness. After her role in 1992 put her on every magazine cover in America, she became one of the most talked about women in Hollywood. And part of that conversation always circled back to her unapologetic high libido. Stone never flinched from those conversations. She called out the double standard openly, pointing out that men in the industry were celebrated for the same appetite that women were quietly punished for. Her willingness to name that contradiction took courage, and it put her at odds with studio executives, who preferred their leading ladies compliant. Stone refused to shrink herself, which made her career both active and complicated. Clara Bow arrived decades earlier, and the industry was far less forgiving. Known as Hollywood's original it girl throughout the 1920s, Bow had a very active personal life that studio bosses decided needed controlling. When her relationships became public, the press did not celebrate her freedom. They used it against her. Tabloids ran stories designed to damage her reputation, and the studio system moved quickly to manage what it saw as a liability. Bow's story is one of the earliest and clearest examples of how Hollywood punished women for the same desires it quietly rewarded in men. Her career declined by her early 30s, a casualty of judgment dressed up as concern. Drew Barrymore's story has a different shape. She became famous at age 7 and grew up entirely in public, which meant her teenage years and early 20s were front-page news. She spoke openly about her wild period, about the parties, the recklessness, and a drive for physical connection that she later described as something close to compulsive. What separates Barrymore from many on this list is what came after. She did the work. She stepped back, sought help, and in time built a life with real boundaries. She now talks about those years with clarity rather than embarrassment, which makes her one of the few cases where the arc bends towards something genuinely stable. Carrie Ann Panice chose a path that most public figures avoid entirely. In 2009, she joined a nationally televised treatment program specifically focused on intimate addiction, putting her struggle on camera for the world to see. She had been a beauty queen and a model, which meant her image was always tied to physical appearance, and walking into a treatment setting publicly took a level of honesty that her industry rarely rewards. Her appearance on that program opened up a conversation about addiction that many viewers had never heard framed in those terms before, because intimate addiction still carries a silence that other forms of addiction do not. Mae West carried no silence about anything. Writing and performing in the 1930s, she built an entire public identity around her bold attitude towards sex. In 1927, New York police arrested her, but West paid her fine and kept working. Her libido was not a secret she kept or a wound she carried. For her, it was power, and she wielded it deliberately. West never apologized for who she was, which made her one of the most genuinely free women in the history of American entertainment. Nicole Narain came forward in 2009. On national television, she described a compulsion towards self-pleasure that had become so consuming it interfered with every part of her daily life. Getting through a normal day, she explained, required managing an urge that came in waves she could not predict or control. Before professional help arrived, the addiction had narrowed her world considerably. Her willingness to describe the specific texture of that experience, rather than speaking in vague terms, made her interview one of the most direct accounts of intimate addiction ever aired on mainstream television. Jada Pinkett Smith added her name to this conversation in 2018, and given her visibility, the admission carried weight. She described herself as a binger during her younger years, someone who used physical intimacy not for connection, but for relief from emotional pain she had not yet learned to process another way. The addiction, she explained, was less about desire and more about numbing. That distinction matters because it points to something that runs through many of the stories on this list. Intimate addiction is often less about the act itself and more about what the person is trying to escape when they reach for it. Amber Smith arrived on the same treatment program as Carrie Ann Paniche, and her presence there carried its own kind of weight. She had worked as a supermodel and actress through the 1990s, appearing in high-profile productions that kept her image consistently tied to beauty and desirability. Checking into a televised rehab program meant allowing the public to see something entirely different from that image. Smith said she wanted people to understand that addiction does not care what you look like or how much you earn. The most glamorous person in any room can be fighting something that the room would never guess. Joan Crawford operated in a Hollywood that kept its secrets far better than today's does. Across decades of biographies, co-star accounts, and studio documents, a picture emerged of a woman with an appetite for intimacy that her contemporaries described as extraordinary. Affairs with Clark Gable, Spencer Tracy, and others have been discussed and documented over the years, and multiple accounts suggest her relationships extended across gender lines, well before that carried any public acceptance. Crawford understood the currency of desire in a system built on image, and she moved through that system on her own terms, even when those terms shocked the people around her. Tallulah Bankhead never needed anyone to expose her. She did it herself, loudly and without regret. Known for her work on stage and on screen through the 1940s, Bankhead treated her high libido as a simple fact about herself, the way another person might mention a favorite color. She collected relationships the way some people collect experiences, with enthusiasm and zero apology. She told interviewers and friends alike that her vices and her pleasures were inseparable parts of who she was. In an era when women were expected to perform modesty, even if they did not feel it, Bankhead's complete refusal to do so made her a well-known figure, a troublemaker, and, to many, a quiet hero. Lindsay Lohan's private life became public in one of the more jarring ways possible. A handwritten list of 36 high-profile celebrity lovers, reportedly authored by Lohan herself, leaked to the press and circulated widely. She later spoke in interviews about a deep fear of being alone, about pushing past boundaries in her personal life because the alternative, sitting with herself in quiet, felt unbearable. The pattern was not simply about desire, it was about avoidance. The constant search for connection served as a wall between Lohan and whatever she was not ready to face inside herself, reflecting a pattern of coping behavior that many mental health professionals view as an attempt to manage underlying emotional distress. Marilyn Monroe sits at number 1, and the reasons go deeper than her public image ever suggested. She became the most famous sex symbol in American history, but the private record tells a far more painful story. Diaries, letters, and accounts from people who knew her well describe a woman who carried a severe need for physical closeness that traced directly back to her childhood. She grew up without stable parents, moved through foster homes, and never experienced the kind of consistent love that children need to feel safe. As an adult, physical intimacy became the closest substitute she could find for that missing security. Each relationship promised something it could not deliver, which meant the cycle never broke. The fame amplified the loneliness rather than curing it, and the smile that appeared on every poster in America masked something that the people closest to her described as a quiet, constant ache. Monroe's story is not one of excess or scandal. At its center, it is a story about a child who never stopped searching for the love she deserved. These 12 women carried their struggles in very different ways. Some with defiance, some in silence. Some by walking into a television studio and telling the truth in front of millions. What connects them is not weakness. What connects them is the gap between the image the world demanded and the reality they actually lived.